Have you ever wondered why gold holds such significance in our global economy? It's not just for its lustrous, alluring shine. Gold, in fact, has been a cornerstone in economic systems for centuries. It's the silent actor behind the scenes, driving economies and shaping nations. You might have heard of the gold standard, but how much do you really know about it? Is it an ancient concept or does it still hold relevance today? Let's dive into the history of the gold standard to understand its importance. The gold standard wasn't born overnight. It took centuries of economic evolution. Our story begins in ancient civilizations, where gold was not just a symbol of wealth, but a practical medium of exchange. The lustrous metal was rare, malleable, and most importantly, it wouldn't corrode or tarnish over time. Gold was universally accepted for its intrinsic value. Whether in Rome, Egypt, or China, gold had a place in the marketplace. However, using gold nuggets or gold dust wasn't exactly practical. So, around the 8th century BC, the concept of gold coins was introduced. This made transactions easier and standardized the value of gold, making it a more reliable form of money. Fast forward to the Middle Ages, goldsmiths started issuing receipts for gold deposits, which people began to use as a form of money. This was the birth of paper money backed by gold. The goldsmiths had essentially become early forms of banks, holding on to gold and issuing paper notes in return. Now let's jump to the 19th century, a pivotal time in our story. The world was becoming more interconnected, and international trade was on the rise. There was a need for a more stable and reliable global monetary system. And so the gold standard was formally adopted by several major economies, including the United Kingdom in 1821 and the United States in 1873. Under the gold standard, a country's currency was directly linked to a specific amount of gold. This ensured that the money supply had a fixed value, which brought stability and trust in the economic system. Countries agreed to convert paper money into a fixed amount of gold. This convertibility guaranteed that the government could not simply print more money to pay off its debts. By the 19th century, the gold standard had become the backbone of global finance. It was seen as a tool to ensure economic stability and foster international trade, shaping the way the world's economies worked for nearly a century. Yet, as we'll see in the next part of our story, the gold standard was not without its challenges. The gold standard had its heyday in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Picture this. It's the late 1800s and the world is buzzing with the spirit of the Industrial Revolution. As countries continue to grow and evolve, so does the need for a stable and reliable form of currency. Enter the gold standard. This system provided the perfect solution, underpinning the world's major economies and facilitating international trade. During this golden era, the gold standard was the backbone of global finance. It was simple, really. The value of a country's currency was directly linked to a specific amount of gold. This standardization provided a sense of stability and trust. If you held a British pound or a US dollar, you knew exactly how much gold it was worth. This made international trade smoother and more predictable, as exchange rates were fixed and transparent. In this period, a host of major countries jumped on the gold standard bandwagon. The United Kingdom was the first to adopt it in the early 19th century, setting the stage for others to follow suit. By the end of the century, countries like Germany, the United States, and France had also adopted the gold standard, solidifying its status as the global norm. But the gold standard didn't just stabilize economies and facilitate trade. It also played a key role in fostering economic growth. With a stable currency, countries could focus on expanding their industries and infrastructure, paving the way for unprecedented economic development. However, it's important to remember that the gold standard was not without its flaws. While it provided stability and predictability, it also limited the flexibility of central banks to respond to economic crises. This rigidity was a double-edged sword, offering stability in times of growth, but potentially exacerbating downturns when they occurred. But as with all good things, the golden era of the gold standard had to end. As the 20th century rolled around, the world would witness the rise and fall of the gold standard, a system that had once been the bedrock of global finance. But that's a story for another time. For now, let's bask in the golden glow of the gold standard at its prime. The gold standard didn't survive the economic turmoil of the 20th century. The 20th century was a period of unprecedented upheaval and change. It was during these turbulent times that the gold standard began to show its cracks. 2 world wars and the Great Depression, three catastrophic events that shook the world to its core, were significant factors in its eventual downfall. The First World War was a massive drain on the world's gold reserves. Nations involved in the conflict printed money to finance their war efforts, leading to inflation. The gold standard, which required a fixed exchange rate, was incompatible with these inflationary pressures. As a result, many countries suspended the gold standard during the war, opting instead for more flexible monetary policies. The interwar period was no less challenging. The Great Depression of the 1930s sent shockwaves through the global economy. Unemployment soared, businesses failed, and economies collapsed. In response, countries devalued their currencies to stimulate exports and boost their economies. Once again, the rigidity of the gold standard proved to be a major disadvantage. It was during this period that the United States, one of the last holdouts of the gold standard, also abandoned it in 1933 under President Franklin D. Roosevelt. World War II further strained global economies, and after the war, most countries were reluctant to return to the gold standard. The economic volatility and the need for more flexible monetary policies made the gold standard seem like a relic of the past. By the mid-20th century, the world had moved towards a system of fiat money, where currencies are not backed by a physical commodity like gold, but by the trust and confidence of the people who use it. The gold standard, once the backbone of global finance, had become a casualty of the tumultuous events of the 20th century. By the mid-20th century, the gold standard was all but abandoned. So where does the gold standard stand today? Well, in a nutshell, it's not the cornerstone of any major economy. We live in a world of fiat currencies where money is not backed by a physical commodity like gold. Instead, it's the trust and confidence in the economy that gives our dollars, euros, or yen their value. However, the gold standard hasn't completely faded into obscurity. There are those who champion its return, citing it as a solution to economic instability. Advocates argue that the gold standard could curb inflation and reduce the risk of financial crises. They believe that tying currency to gold would impose fiscal discipline, forcing governments to live within their means. On the flip side, critics argue that the gold standard is an outdated concept that would do more harm than good in today's complex global economy. Detractors point out that it could limit the ability of central banks to respond to economic downturns. In a gold standard system, the money supply is tied to the amount of gold a country possesses. This could potentially lead to deflation and economic stagnation if a country's gold reserves are depleted. Furthermore, critics highlight the practical challenges of returning to a gold standard. For one, the sheer volume of gold needed to back the world's money supply is astronomically high. Secondly, the price of gold is volatile, which could lead to economic instability. One key point of contention between advocates and critics is the role of government in the economy. Supporters of the gold standard often favor minimal government intervention, while critics argue for the importance of proactive monetary policy. In the end, the debate over the gold standard is more than just an economic discussion. It's a clash of ideologies, a tug-of-war between different views on the role of government, the nature of money, and the best way to ensure economic stability. The gold standard may be a thing of the past, but its legacy lives on. Whether it's seen as a golden age of fiscal responsibility or a bygone era of economic rigidity, the gold standard continues to spark debate and shape our understanding of money and economy. Let's recap what we've learned about the gold standard. This monetary system, with roots reaching back to ancient times, found its footing in the 19th century. Countries across the globe, including the United States, tied their currencies to a specific amount of gold. This gold standard brought a degree of stability, as the value of currency was no longer subject to the whims of government policy. The golden age of the gold standard, however, was not meant to last. The onset of World War I saw countries leaving the system to finance their war efforts. Post-war attempts to return to the gold standard met with little success, as economic disparities led to trade imbalances, creating an environment ripe for financial crisis. The Great Depression was the final nail in the coffin for the gold standard. As countries struggled to stabilize their economies, they abandoned the gold standard in favor of more flexible monetary policies. The United States, one of the last holdouts, officially left the gold standard in the 1930s. Today, the gold standard is a thing of the past. Modern economies have adopted fiat currencies where the value of money is not backed by any physical commodity. However, the debate over the gold standard continues, with some advocating for its return, while others vehemently oppose the idea. Whether or not the gold standard makes a comeback, its impact on our global economy is undeniable.